everyone, please take your seats. Don't leave the room. Take your seats. There'll be more people coming in who've been to the Gründerquartier sessions previously. Thank you so much for turning up today. We already heard there were various journeys here. It's a panel which is very close to the core of our mission because it's in one of the neglected early stage fields of technology, which is aviation. Once again, we've prepared a fact sheet. You also have in your hands probably, or you've seen previously, just to give everyone an overview afterwards. We will condense key findings of the session, of the discussion, and cut a short movie afterwards and also spread it with the fact sheet in order to, in the end, have your conclusions and make sure they'll be heard and spread amongst policymakers and investors and others who are working on this. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and thank the moderator of this panel, who also did the concept of the session, which is Tobias Lehchenfeld. Tobias is the founder and CEO of 1.5 Ventures, a venture builder. He has an impressive track record with various international posts across his career, including at the World Bank. You might add a word also on that in the course of the session. And in addition, he's working with innovators in these fields, and one of these innovators also made it here, which we appreciate a lot. So I'll hand over the word to you, not forgetting to say there'll be lunch afterwards served here, walking lunch, as we're heading off to the next locations. So it's over to you, Tobias. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. And this is the SAF session on aviation, so we really want to take off today. Great pleasure to introduce to you, first of all, Mathias Boesl, CEO and founder of Spark eFuels, one of the very few ambitious e-fuels companies in Europe that's tackling this challenge. The focus of Spark is on CO2 emissions, reducing those through e-fuels, but also on non-CO2 emissions. So that's going to come in very handy today because we'll discuss those two areas. He's previously worked in green technologies, e-fuels, on fusion, on fuel cell cars, and photovoltaics. So quite a background on the technology side. He was also a senior consultant with the Boston Consulting Group, has a PhD in physics from the TU Munich, and an MBA from the Collège des Ingénieurs. So welcome, Mathias. Then second on stage, Eva Oney, coming straight from Brussels this morning, as we all heard already. She's with the European Commission and is the team lead for sustainable aviation, so pretty much has her hands exactly on these topics every day with the DG Mobility and Transport. So we'll be very excited to hear your views on where policy is going, what can be done. Previously, she worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers, also was active in investment and trade, and has a master's in law with focus on international economic law. So welcome, Eva, to the panel. Third with us, and thank you also for coming all the way from Paris, is Hortense Becheux. She works with EIT InnoEnergy, one of the biggest investment funds for early stage acceleration of sustainable energy innovations, where she is a business development manager and focuses on the green hydrogen accelerator of EIT Energy. I'm sure you'll tell us more about that. She previously worked in a corporate startup accelerator, so that's really, she has a good track record in that with Crédit Agricole, has a BA in law and a master's in management from Grenoble. So welcome, Hortense, to our panel. And last but not least, of course, Dr. Felix Coons. He's the head of electrochemical process and systems technology at the research center Jülich. For those who don't know Jülich, it's one of the largest applied research centers across Europe, where they build massive pilots and really see what works and doesn't work. And it's a real pleasure to have you here and learn from you and the real world research that you're doing at Jülich. He previously was in charge of hydrogen at Uniper and worked also on fuel cells and hydrogen technologies at the RWTH Aachen, the Technical University. Welcome, Felix, to the panel. All right, so you see it's quite a charged panel, but we believe it takes a lot to move sustainable aviation fuels forward. It is a very complex topic. As Peter already said, it's often considered one of the technologies that a lot of companies, investors, even engineers shied away from because it seemed too complex or too long. And it's only in the last few years, really, that the sector is starting to wake up and well, beginning to take off, I would say. Starting to move on the runway. Now, today's panel is focused all about scaling SAF, because really today we're at a position where we have nearly zero sustainable aviation fuels on the market. For an airline, it's virtually impossible to procure any of it. It's very, very limited supply. And so we'll be talking about the supply side, the demand side challenges, but also the pricing mechanism, because in the end of the day, even with all the good supply and demand, if the price doesn't work, then we can't move forward. To set the stage, I wanted to just share a few small facts before we really get into the discussion, so that we're more or less on the same page. Probably many of you know this already, but aviation accounts for about 4% of the global climate or greenhouse gas impacts every year, and is bound to grow as aviation is bound to grow. So that's a major challenge. About half of it, or even more than half of it, comes from the non-CO2 effect. So, for example, these beautiful contrails that you can see in the sky sometimes. These are technical challenges that we'll be discussing. Then on the technology side, on the solution side, I think a variety of technologies have been proposed over the last years. In the German government, for instance, there's a big faction that is lobbying for battery-powered planes. Unfortunately, batteries are very heavy, so it's really hard to take off with anything major, bigger than a private jet. Others are proposing hydrogen-powered planes. Airbus is developing those. Unfortunately, they announced that it will take about 10 years to get there, so we would horribly miss the 2030 goals if that was our only strategy. And that really leaves us with aviation fuels based on either organic matter, so-called biofuels or advanced biofuels, and synthetic fuels, so e-fuels based on hydrogen. And it's the latter two that we'll be discussing today primarily, because we feel this is where the challenge is. This is also where the SAF quotas are in place, and this is where we, I think, as a society, as all of Europe, really hope to see moving towards and have those at scale. So, without going into the quotas, I have these here as well, if anybody wants to know the numbers. Let's open the panel. And what I wanted to ask each of you, if you could, in let's say a short sentence, how you see your own role and what can you do to actually help scale up the SAF in your capacity, in your job. Over to you.
Should I start? Yeah, perfect. Maybe just one sentence will be a little bit less, but I tried. So in the end, what we are doing, we are a young startup still, an e-fuel startup focused on e-fuels. So if you look at SAF, as Tobias already mentioned, there's biogenic or bio-based fuels, and there's e-fuels. So biofuels, as most of you probably know, at some point they will run into a feedstock limit or limitation. So that's why we definitely focus on e-fuels, because that will be at least one solution for the future, technological solution for the future. And our company now is really developing a process, e-fuel facility, to really be able to scale up the production of e-fuels and also be able to produce very affordable e-fuels for the future. So we as a startup, what we can do is really develop the technology and also bring the technology that is developed, for example, at the university to commercial scale, and then try to build up and scale up this overall production.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as you have referred in your introduction, the aviation emission has been rising. So the technology has not been sufficient to reverse that increasing emissions growth. However, decarbonizing aviation is its license to grow, if not even to operate. So we need to do something. We need to take action. We have a SAF. It offers various opportunities in short term, in long term. However, as you said, the uptake is very low. So here is the role from the policy side. What frameworks we can put, what regulatory policy frameworks we can put, financial frameworks to break this cycle and bring SAF to the market.
Good morning. No, I'm not sure. but hello everyone. So from our point of view, basically we are trying to build companies from scratch in some fields like green steel or fertilizers and aviation. So I think that's the most important stuff for us is to be able to bring all the value chain, the off-takers, the producers, everybody, the stakeholders around the same table to be part of one project and to help the market to be ready and for this new I don't remember my word for that.
Yeah, and maybe from my side, so in general, from the research and development side, there are great ideas to really enable the defossilization of the sectors, and so get out the carbon out of, let's say, the processes to really create carbon neutral processes in the end of the day. And we at the IEK9, which is the section for the fundamental electrochemistry at the Forschungszentrum Jülich, we really focus on electrochemical systems like batteries, fuel cells, and electrolyzers. And based on these technologies, I can say that they will enable us really to combine our sectors to bring the renewable energy to fuels. So we are talking about power-to-liquid concepts, for example. And then we can really create this shift from this fossil energy world, which we are still living in, to really a clean one where we have carbon neutral processes and long-term also carbon-free processes. So fuel cell, for example, will in the end of the day enable us to also power several applications based on hydrogen with no carbon in it. Today, our focus, as was said, it will lay on, as I understand it, on synthetic fuels. So this is where we are definitely focusing on carbon neutral processes then, which is definitely from the electrolyzer side very important.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, first of all, for everyone's opening. So let's jump right into it. One of the key policies to enable this market has been a set of quotas which slowly scale up. They start very, very modestly, 2025, 2030, and then up to 2050 to reach the European climate objectives on targets. There's been a lot of debate recently from both airlines, from non-profits, pushing for higher quotas. Eva, do you think the current quotas are too low?
Yes, so with the Refuel EU initiative, we have made a proposal last year, now it is in the legislative process. So this is one of the key points which is being now discussed between the Parliament and the Council. What is the right level of the mandate for the blending of the SAF being put on the market? So the mandate is on the fuel suppliers. And an important question is actually what is the right level? And here there are a couple of factors which needs to be taken into consideration when deciding the levels and the ramp up, how it should. So first of all, it's the climate perspective. So we need to be ambitious. The Europe has very ambitious goal for the climate neutrality by 2050. So we need to be ambitious, but we also need to be realistic. We need to give all the sectors right to contribute to this decarbonization. All sectors needs to contribute. But we also need to keep in mind that the resources are limited, and we need to do it in a way that is most effective way. So taking from other sector which much more pollutes than aviation and shifting the feedstocks, that also we want to avoid this situation. So we need to take into consideration these linkages between the sectors. So that's from the climate perspective. Then, of course, we have the technological dimension. We are currently, the SAF is only 0.05% of all fuels used in aviation. So it's just a fraction. It doesn't exist. So we need to take into consideration maturity and also, of course, as well, the economic factors. So,
question. Mathias, from a startup perspective, but also you talk to airlines, you talk to investors, how do you look at the quota at the moment? And there's a push out there to basically triple the short-term quota. Does that make sense? Is it enough? Should it be less?
I guess what we have to distinguish is really the quota for bio-based fuels or biofuels and the quota for e-fuels. So I guess the quotas that are out in the discussion at the moment, they are a good first step actually. But if you look at 2015, we have a quota of 62% of SAF. So what is happening with the other 37%? We want to have this industry completely free from emissions and free from CO2 emissions also. So at my opinion, it should be 100%. That's one thing. And the other thing is, if you look at the e-fuels quota, so there's nothing at all happening in 2025. There's no quota set at EU level, and there's a very limited quota for 2030. So in my opinion, and also there was a study recently published from Transport and Environment where they questioned different players in this e-fuel space, and most of them say they already would like to scale up and could scale up, and especially until 2030. But the problem is the quotas are not there. And if there's no quota, there's no market, and then nobody will pay the price, the higher price that you have for e-fuels. And then again, you have the problem that the technological development will be delayed at some point.
Okay, thank you. Hortense, you're also talking to investors. How do they look at the quota discussion and this kind of chicken-egg problem of, do we wait until supply is there to set a quota, or do we first set a quota so supply arrives?
Yeah, that's right. That's a chicken and egg issue. Well, the investors are pretty afraid by that situation. I think nowadays they struggle to invest in some sectors not that sure. So that's why we try to create from scratch new companies, bringing the investors to invest in those new companies and not just into startups or new innovational projects.
Okay, thank you. Then another big topic, and I think many of you in the aviation space are aware of this, is of course next to the CO2 effects that come from burning the fuel, you have the non-CO2 effects. Contrails already mentioned that. And this is really a question for Felix, because I think it's very technical, but it has a lot of implications for the market as well. When you look at, let's say, the ideal solution, the perfect solution in the long run, what do you think it could look like for the non-CO2 effects? And in the short term, in the midway basically to get there, are there any solutions that can help us to accelerate there and to basically achieve that target faster?
Yes, so I cannot talk about all technologies which are in research and development for aviation, but what we can say is that the constraints are related to the surroundings as well and to the process. So, and there are studies out there, I know them from the DLR, about the altitude, that because they depend on the altitude of the plane when it is in the air. And so in general, what we can say also, if we try to burn hydrogen, pure hydrogen, we will see the NOx, which is also an emission. So it's not only about really reducing carbon dioxide from the combustion, but also investigating the entire combustion process, even if we are talking about pure hydrogen, for example. Long term, I think that really fuel cells and batteries are definitely of interest here to be considered, but it's a long term. And in the meantime, we definitely need to optimize the combustion process itself, and the entire process when the plane is in the air, right? Where it is, on which altitude, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Eva, from a policy perspective, are the whole topic of non-CO2 effects, is that already something where the Commission feels strongly about, or do you say, well, this is still early technical readiness level, this is more research stuff, we'll have to wait a few years until we regulate it, or is there already a push for, let's say, a quota for non-CO2 effects?
Yes, so at EU level we have financed for the last 10 years many studies under Horizon. We had in 2020 published a report. It was from EASA, so our agency, Aviation Safety Agency, has published a report on non-CO2, because that's important, as you said, equal as at least as much as CO2 impacts. So there they look also at different measures which we are looking and analyzing. And one of the non-regret options, because there are trade-offs, there uncertainties. So for many options, that has to be very well assessed. But then we look at the non-regret. Then is definitely the shift to renewable energy sources, whether we talk about SAF or whether we talk about the future technologies of aircraft.
Okay. Then one thing that I've been wondering about for quite a while, because we always put the different SAFs, the biofuels and the synthetic fuels in one pot, and we treat them pretty much as equals. But really when we look at the non-CO2 effects, which is about, well, more than half or so of the total climate impact, it appears that biofuels still have that problem very much, whereas synthetic fuels have very little of that effect. Much less because they're cleaner, chemically cleaner in their production. Does that affect your thinking in terms of fuel production and also your choice not to go for biofuels, even though some people argue biofuels may be the faster way forward?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the easiest measure that you can take to reduce non-CO2 reductions definitely is rerouting of aviation. That's also what Felix said. But for the different types of fuels, or let's say the SAF fuels, you would have the biogenic ones and you would have the e-fuels ones. Biogenic ones, they still have the issue that you have a lot of aromatics in there and many pollutants, and they cause actually these non-CO2 effects. If you go to e-fuels, you could develop a process where you don't have the aromatics. There's an additional problem with the aromatics because you at the moment need it for the combustion still, but in the future, most of the suppliers from combustion turbines already said you don't need it. But focusing on the e-fuels, you can leave out these aromatics, you have less non-CO2 effects, but then what you have to do is really upgrade this fuel completely at your site. If you co-refine it with a refinery, that means take your product, your pre-product, take it to the refinery, let it upgrade by them, then again you have this non-CO2 effects included in the fuel. So it's super important for us at least to consider, do we want to collaborate with a refinery? Probably at the beginning it's the easiest and would at least take out the CO2 effect. But long term it's super important to also consider how to take out this non-CO2 effects, and then doing the upgrading decentral, also probably at your own facility, could be interesting.
Maybe just to add on that, because it sounds a little bit complex, but from a technology level or even from a policy level, are there things where you'd say, looking at Felix or looking at Eva, would say these things would help us to kind of get there faster? Because in the end of the day, it's not just about having greener fuels. We really want CO2 neutral fuels or climate neutral fuels, basically, that don't have any climate impact. Do you want to, so basically on the technology level, is there something that would help you to get there faster, or on a policy level, is there something that would help you faster on the non-CO2 effects?
Like on the non-CO2 effects, definitely on the regulatory sector. If we have some kind of non-CO2 regulation also, it would help us to, because then you can at least sell different types of fuels, for example, the ones with non-CO2 effects included, ones without non-CO2 effects. And obviously you have to price them higher, because what you need to do for the production of non-CO2 fuels is also build up facilities for this to produce them. That means higher capex cost, and that means higher costs for the fuels. So for us, it would be super helpful to also have the regulations for it, and also have the investment and the capital to build up these facilities.
Okay. Felix, any last thoughts on this issue? Because it is quite technical.
Yeah, so in general, I would say it's important to really bring together the industry and research and development. I think this is also why you asked Mathias on this, because we can have really good ideas on the processes, on how to really get a cleaner energy. And so what my recommendation is really to support networks where industry and research come together, also with politics, because in the end of the day, also politics need to be open to adjust their regulations if there is an innovation coming up, right? And so I think research in general can really support quite well. We need to understand what is the interest of the industry. And I think policy needs to really make the targets, and then we need to address these targets with technologies. And on this way, we definitely need to understand which are the technologies that the industry really want to apply. We should be technology open, but there will be selected technologies that are brought forward from the industry. And this is only from the research perspective to be understood if we come together in a cluster, in a network, right?
Very good. No, that's a very important point, and I absolutely agree. Of course, having these kind of consortia with research, with industry, with new technology companies, very, very important. Now let's switch. This was all about supply. How do we beef up supply? What are the challenges on the supply side? Now let's switch over to the demand side, because in the end of the day, it's us, the final passengers, who are flying, but also it's airlines that have to use these fuels. And that actually brings me to my first question. So fuels are purchased by airlines, but the quota doesn't target airlines. The quota targets the distributors of fuels. Why is that? And is that really the most effective way of scaling sustainable aviation fuels, Eva? Short.
We will be short on this. Yes, we analyze different approaches in our impact assessment, and the fuel suppliers, they have already experience under Renewable Energy Directive. They are already acquainted with the system. It's also helps with the implementation. So that's why we decided to go with that approach.
Mathias, from an operational perspective, when you talk to airlines, but also now that you're entering the market with your own company, does it work? Does it make sense? Or would it be easier in your perspective if airlines were targeted directly?
Depends. So fuel providers will always be a part of this value chain. So it makes sense at somehow to include them also, because they have also the control on the previous steps of the value chain. But also it's super important to have the end customer bought into this overall policy. So for us, it would be interesting to have a split contribution of both, but obviously it's more complicated than to build up the regulation for it. So yeah, would be helpful, definitely, but depends on how the regulatory environment can be built up.
Okay, thank you. Then a question to Felix again on those contrails. So we talked a little bit about the complexities of it. If you would have to put a price tag on it, given your knowledge of aromatics and the processes involved, by how much would you say roughly would, compared to a standard SAF, would the price increase if we also take care of the non-CO2 effects?
Yeah, I think it is hard really to put a price tag directly on it, so I couldn't make it. But yeah, we should really try to reduce it, really try to understand the process, reduce the off-gas, reduce also carbon from it. This is what it is. And yeah, putting a price on it could be one way, but also there could be another way, just trying to reduce it. This is, I think, the better way, right? Because if it just becomes more and more expensive with no having another solution, it doesn't help, right? We need to get the solution to get it out, to get out the carbon, to get out the NOx. And so this is my recommendation, to really do research on these topics. I couldn't put a price tag on it.
Okay. So there's a study that came out just this week from PwC, and they actually forecasted the price development over the next 10 years for SAF in general, so without special accounting for the non-CO2 effects. And they said since the CO2 prices are going up and e-fuel prices tend to go down, and renewable energy will likely to go down, they calculated that actually by the time we'll have it in the market at a scaled level by 2030, I believe was the year, the price difference will be negligible. So a flight, I think they said, from Munich to New York would only cost 36 euros more than a regular flight in coach class. So I feel often we have this price debate, but it seems like the price issue actually seems to be much lower on the final passenger than many assume. So it's not about doubling or tripling or quadrupling, especially on these long-haul flights. Eva, from your perspective, is the price development a concern in setting these quotas and other policies around SAF? Or are you saying, well, we don't really have much of a choice, and we trust that the different market instruments that we have developed will kind of come together to make it bearable for the passengers?
Yes, no, the price is, of course, is very important to consider as well. It was looked with the ramp up, so that we start low and then it builds up faster. And with economies of scale, we see the price would be decreasing. And then you also have, currently we have quite high petrol prices. As you said, high carbon price is increasing. We are now proposing revision of the ETS, which will also strengthen the price signal. There is also a proposal to remove the mandatory exemption on the kerosene. So this will also increase. So flying with kerosene is getting more expensive and it will get more expensive. So it will also help to reduce the price gap.
Okay. Mathias, from your perspective, because I remember we had a conversation a while ago about all the great studies that are out there, and they all seem to point in the same direction. And as soon as you talk to actual airlines, the conversation goes quite differently. So how is it in the real world, the price difference, and how are airlines responding to it?
Yeah, the big problem still with airlines is that they are really looking at the price. So also if you talk about SAF, with airlines, normally they focus on the cheapest version of SAF. So the cheapest version at the moment is HEFA, HIB. So not so fully sustainable in my opinion. And yeah, that's also what studies show. So the problem really is you have to give them some incentive, could also be a mandate in the end, to make them also buy the more, at the moment, more expensive option, like for example, e-fuels or advanced biofuels. And then to accelerate this cost decrease, because the more often we build up these facilities, the faster down will go down the capex cost, and then we really can also produce a very cheap fuel in the future. But for this, obviously, we have to increase the mandate somehow to make it possible to really have cheap fuel in the future. But for airlines, definitely they really look at the price, because that's fuel is one big part of the cost.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the quotas. Are there any other instruments in the debate or that you've been discussing? That's an open question really to anyone on the panel, that we could consider or that should be considered, because I feel like the focus on quotas may be helpful, but might not be enough. Eva, I'm going to volunteer you.
No, so we have the mandate. I also already mentioned that the price signal from the fossil side. So we have the ETS revision and taxation. To complement this, it's not enough. We are doing more. As well, there is a funding side related with the technology, to mature the technology, to bring the first of the kind plants. So this is also that we have different funds there. We have the Horizon Europe, we have Innovation Fund, we have InvestEU, so targeting different stages, different type of projects. One is grants, another would be loans. As well, I should do some advertising. We have launched the Alliance for Renewable and Low Carbon Fuels. And we would like to invite the stakeholders. It's open to join for the entire value chain. And it will look at the aspects how to actually bring those, make those plants realize, bring them to market. By 2030, our impact assessment says we need around 7 plants. By 2050, we need more than 100. So we need to bring them, we need to reduce the price gap. So this will be the task for the Alliance, to look for investments, to look for financing.
You're sitting next to your partners. Fantastic. You should talk about that. Felix, what are the biggest price drivers in terms of cost when you look at the ingredients of e-fuel? So because so much of the demand side, as we just heard, is driven ultimately by the price. So what is making these e-fuels so horribly expensive or
Yeah, so we heard about funding, and so this is also, I think this is also very linked to each other, the question where it is expensive and where do we need funding. And I would say it's definitely a CAPEX thing, so we need to get financial support in order to really do the investments, but also Opex funding is very important to really get a competitive price. And I think that only if we have both, then we will have a chance to really bring the SAF really to 100% into the market. Because the process itself is expensive, so this is where we have a high energy prices which go into the plant. But also, as I said, so we need to have, in order so that the companies, that the industry can do the investments, we also need to give them CAPEX funding yeah.
So, side remark, it is not allowed in Europe to fund both CapEx and Opex in an operation through the state. So we actually will have to choose, unfortunately, or break all the rules, which I'd rather not recommend. On the Opex side, let me just drill down on this. What is it that's driving the Opex cost so high? Because what does e-fuels need? It needs a bit of water, it needs a bit of energy, and then it needs a bit of CO2. Which one of these three is driving the price so high?
Well, it's the entire process. If we think about how to produce e-kerosene, for example, then we could use a high-temperature electrolyzer after a direct air capture system. So it's about really, if we go through this entire route, you see how much components we need, and this makes the process itself so expensive. So we start with a direct air capture system where we're going to get out the carbon out of the air, bring it to carbon dioxide, which we can then feed into a high-temperature electrolyzer, which generates, as you said, together with water, or syngas. So it consists of hydrogen and coal monoxide. This we can bring into the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, and this one will bring out the e-kerosene. The entire route itself has so much capex that it is this expensive, and also it requires the energy in order to really go through this route, that we also need this, where we see then also high Opex costs. So this is, I think, the answer to your question, right?
Okay, so just to summarize that, so it really boils down to the energy cost of running the whole process. Maybe that's then a follow-up question for Mathias. Is there a way to reduce the Opex when you look at the energy supply? Does it make sense to own the energy supply? Would that be a way to reduce the operating cost?
Yeah, like I have the absolutely same opinion. It's definitely the energy costs. Energy cost is the main Opex factor. That's why we really have to find a way to reduce it somehow. There's a couple of things you can do. One is really increase the efficiency of the process. That's something that we try. And if you can increase the efficiency of a process by 20%, then you almost have 20% less of your Opex costs. That's great. That's one thing. The other thing that you can do, you can really go to these really low-cost renewable energy locations. And that's definitely not here in Germany. Maybe if you have like offshore hydrogen at some point, but like far out in the future. But it will be somewhere. It will be northern part of Africa. It will be Australia, wherever. It could be maybe still in Norway or in Spain, in Europe. But that's where you have to go to really bring down these Opex costs. So that's one thing. But still, if you look at direct air capture, for example, at the beginning, that's also a pretty big part of your CapEx or Opex. It depends on if you get it as a CO2 then, or if you get it by building up the direct air capture. So that's why at the beginning, that's pretty critical to really think about direct air capture right from the start as the only source. What we have to do is really use all the different sources of CO2 that are available at the moment. And then maybe far out in the future, that would be the choice when the costs go down for direct air capture.
So if I get this right, so because the energy cost is so high, we can't afford right now to go straight for direct air capture, for example, but it would make more sense to start with other non-avoidable emissions, for example?
It's not just the energy costs. Actually, it's also the capex costs of the facilities. And in addition, like the supply for direct air capture facilities is not really high. Like if you talk, for example, to a major direct air capture company at the moment, they say you can get a direct air capture facility in 2028 probably. Okay. So for first facility. Yeah.
Maybe also to this, it's also about the electrolyzer. So we're talking about degradation, about lifetime, and so you need to replace your electrolyzer stack from time to time in order to really have the lifetime which you want to have, like 30 years or so. And you need to replace it from time to time. This raises the costs, and you can allocate it to capex or opex, so it's an investment if you see it this way, but also you do it generally, so you can also consider it like opex, and this also raises the price in the end of the day.
Eva, from your perspective, I'm sure you're aware of all these challenges and the complexities, and that's really what's making SAF so complex, I think, for a lot of people entering that space. What's your view on the CO2 sources, on direct air capture, but also what can be done about reducing the cost of energy for these new SAF companies?
So within the RefuelEU framework, we are relying here on the Renewable Energy Directive. So these are our colleagues in DG Energy who are in charge of that. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we will follow the horizontal regulation for that. So it would be the same when we talk about the e-fuels, then you will have in that regulation, you will have the GHG reduction methodology, how to calculate. So this will be following that. Yeah, the reducing the cost with the increase of scale of operations, that would be important. Making more renewable energy available, bringing the costs down. Recently, the Commission has published the Repower EU initiative. There, it's further increasing the ambition to have even more renewable energy share on the market. So there is a lot. This is a big priority for the EU. A lot of initiatives are happening.
Hortense, last question for you on this. From the companies that you're supporting, do you feel this is sufficient support, or would the aviation companies that you're working with, the startups, for example, require more help on those instruments for direct air capture or the overall energy cost and supply?
We are not supporting companies in this field, but we are creating new pure players in this field. So I can't answer like that. Yeah, we try to, for example, we have a project of the creation of a company in the field of SAF. And the main point for us is to create from scratch this company without any subsidies. And this is really important because we can't rely on subsidies to be efficient and to prove to the markets that that's possible, and that's not just a dream or something not really sure.
Okay. Very good. All right, then let's open up for the audience. I'm sure there's a few questions in the room. If anyone has a question, please step forward so you can use the mics. We'll have the mics here. The floor is yours. Yes. Do you want to come up really quick?
I'll introduce you already. Anouk Kendall, please. Decentralized Energy Canada. At least with the cameras can catch it.
I'm sorry, this might be a really naive question, but on the biofuels, can you just, and I don't think you did this, can you just go through, is it biogas, renewable natural gas, or is it, what are the biofuels you're looking at? And I'm assuming there's a better performance with renewable natural gas as opposed to biogas, but I'm not sure for aviation.
Okay, who wants to take this? Or do we collect first? Felix, do you want to take this one already, and then we'll wait for more questions?
Yeah, so the route which I just created is e-kerosene, but talking about biofuels could also be like creating it based on biomass. So there are different routes to go this way. I think this is it. So it's rather about synthetic generated fuels which we are talking about. Yeah.
So wood, cellulosic fuels, and are you using digestion, pyrolysis, combustion, gasification?
Yeah, so what I just explained the way from with the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, right? You can do it this way, and then you can also start with biomass. You can also start with direct air capture system. Then you can also, instead of a electrolyzer, use thermochemistry. So there are different really routes to go to e-fuel in the end of the day.
So, Mathias, do you want to add a couple of words on biofuels?
Yeah, maybe a couple of words on this. Maybe what's super important is in the aviation, the fuel that you produce really has to be certified. Certified means there's an agency that says with this process you can produce it, and the end product of this can be used for jet fuel. That's super important. There's 5 pathways that you can take on the bio-based route, and there's 2 pathways for e-fuels. So for the 5 pathways, for example, it can be HEF. HIF. That means they are from, for example, waste from, I don't know, fats from animals, for example, or used cooking also, for example. There's a couple of other options, and there's the e-fuels option. So it really always depends on the process that you can take, and it also depends then, in the end, also on the CO2 that you can take for this process. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yep. And we have more on that. Other questions? Please come up already and get in line. But please, yes.
I just wanted to say, so from the fuel proposal, what we are looking at that we want to incentivize is focus on the advanced biofuels and on the e-fuels. And there what is in the scope from the biofuel side is this, we call it under Renewable Energy Directive, the ones from the Part B feedstock. So these ones are this waste lipids, so use cooking oil, for example, vegetable oil and animal fats. And then from the so-called Part A of the Annex 9 of this Renewable Energy Directive, and there we are looking at the feedstock, for example, municipal solid waste, forest and agriculture residues, energy crops. So this one, the so-called advanced biofuels, which we most want to focus, and then e-fuels. So that's the scope in our initiative.
Right, thank you.
Ariesta.
And maybe introduce yourself with a short sentence.
Thank you. I'm Ariesta from UNFCCC. I just want to know whether the CORSIA scheme that was introduced by ICAO a couple of years ago is actually been helpful in terms of, I don't know if there is any relationship at all. I'm not an aviation expert, but I'm interested to know whether this kind of scheme is actually helpful in uptake the clean technology and in particular finding the alternative fuels like what you just discussed.
You're really good in finding contentious topics. Who wants to take this one? I'm sure you've been exposed to this one. Yeah.
Yes. No, we fully support CORSIA, and EU has been promoter for CORSIA. So it provides the worldwide first sustainability framework. So for aviation, of course, global level playing field is very important. You fly with SAF and then you need to return. So you also want to make sure that SAF is available everywhere.
Maybe explain the CORSIA just very briefly to everyone in the room. So just how it works, what's the objective?
Yeah, so CORSIA is carbon offsetting and reduction for international aviation. And it's we entered as from 2021 the pilot phase, and it's that from the baseline year, so it's still being discussed, but average 2019, 2020 emissions, everything what is above increase would have to be offsets or by use of SAF. So it's basically to agreeing to cap the emissions. So yeah, it provides it promotes the SAF. It also helps to provide the sustainability framework. So definitely, it's a good way forward.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that one? Good. Then other questions in the room? Please, yes.
Hi, Julia Sauter with the Long Duration Energy Storage Council. Curious about how storage is starting to come into more of the conversation of aviation fuels, and also, out of curiosity, spacecraft travel and the fuels used there. What are some lessons learned for us going forward with zero carbon aviation?
Fantastic. Who wants to take this one?
Maybe just on the storage. That's actually a very important point for what we are doing at the moment. So you can actually, in the process that Felix described, could stop after the renewable energies and store it in batteries. You could stop after the hydrogen and store it in hydrogen tanks, or then you go until the end, until some kind of crude oil that you produce, or until the final end where you have a fuel. And what's super important here is that you take the right point where you stop this process chain for the delivery of the final, or of the, let's say, pre-product. So it could be, like, what could make sense is either you stop it after production of crude oil and then ship it, for example, to a refinery, or you go until the final end. It really depends on the capex cost, it depends on the Opex cost, also logistics cost, but it's super important for us also. And in this overall process, you also see that, for example, the renewables they're not flat. They have heights and they have lows, for example. And they're also in this process. It's super important to really have storages for the different types of energy that you have.
Anybody else wants to add on that? Felix, you look very knowledgeable.
Yeah, maybe also talking about hydrogen here. So we would have, it's absolutely correct, and then we would have the chance to really go with a gas, hydrogen gas, but you wouldn't go this way because if you like to store it and bring it into a plane, then it is very heavy. So the higher you go with the pressure for hydrogen in order to really get a usable energy density, the thicker you need to have the tank. So if we think about mobile applications, then we know about this 350 and 700 bar technology. But you wouldn't go into a plane with this because it causes too much weight and too much volume in a plane. So what you would do is you would liquefy and go with liquid hydrogen into it. But also by today, this is also too heavy and no real alternative. But this is something for the future. So my expectation goes into the direction long term that we would have liquid hydrogen stored in planes combined with fuel cells and e-machine in order to really operate the plane. What we do have today, I think that this must also be mentioned. There is this auxiliary power unit where we just, let's say, we replace the fossil-based energy supply on board by cleaner alternatives. And we know it from, for example, the Apollo mission. There also a fuel cell was used in order to, as APU, in order to have this auxiliary power supply. And this is also a reduction in emission in the end of the day. And also what is good about it, you just generate water on board, which could also be used. It's very important for us human beings. We also need to think about it, right?
Thank you so much. Now, if there's no further hands up in the audience, I would go back to the panel and ask for your closing remark. And really what I think was burning on our fingertips is this question: what would be a specific step to help you drive innovation in the SAF space faster? If you had a wish, whether it's to the regulators, to industry partners, or to investors, what would you say? What is the one thing that could really make your life easier? Mathias, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Maybe what could really make our life easier. We are still at the beginning of what we are planning, and we really want to scale up quickly. So for us, it's super important to somehow get money, obviously. So financing partners are super important. And it's also really important for us to have some clarity of the, let's say, of the subsidies or of the mandates and so on. So what's the one thing in the end that would I value the most would be really the clarity about the subsidies and about the mandates, because then you can also address capital markets and tell them that's the business case, that's how we can sell it, that's the market we will sell it in, and with this you can really go to finances and just get the money from them in the end, if you have the right solution, obviously.
All right, thank you. Eva.
Well, it's a big challenge, and this is not that industry alone or policymaker alone or investor alone can do. So we need all the government, the investors, the companies, the research institutes, accelerators. We need everyone to cooperate to achieve. And so one thing that I would say to accelerate is to join the alliance, of course.
Right.
I just repeat it. It's the Alliance Renewable and Low Carbon Fuels Alliance.
Very good. Understood. Everyone invited. Hortense, on your side, from your perspective and the work you're doing, what would be the one thing that could help accelerate in the SAF space?
I think the one thing who could help it, as we mentioned it a bit before, it's the chicken and egg issue. It's like everybody is waiting for everybody's moving. So we need, I think, to have quotas a bit more higher, but not too much. But yeah, to make the people move forward this new market.
Okay, so you need the quotas to break the egg.
Yeah, yeah.
Good, very good. Felix, from your perspective.
Yeah, maybe from politics, we definitely need to have a clear vision, clear targets. I think it should be technology open, but we should have targets and a good regulation in which we can move ourselves. Then from industry, we definitely need to come together, to work together, to bring our ideas through the valley of death of the TRL scale. So it's the middle of the TRL scale through this valley of death to higher TRLs to the applications. So the applications need to come from the lab out to the real application. And this is also where we, from the research side, need public funding, but also the companies we work with. So it's like the entire network needs to be funded in the end of the day, and we need the support, as I said, from politics, but also from the industry.
Well, thank you for that. So I think there's a lot of takeaways for the session, certainly for me, also quite a few learnings here. I'd say the first one, clearly the critical importance of the quotas, that the quotas get increased, but mostly that there is clarity around the quotas very quickly. I think that's one very clear takeaway. Another one is the importance of also focusing on the energy cost. I think that came out very, very clearly. And anything we can do, whether it's restructuring the process, whether it's somehow bringing the prices down, focusing on efficiency, that will help to make the aviation fuels, sustainable aviation fuels, more affordable, but even just to create a business case for them and help anyone moving into the sector. And I would say the last thing that you said, this collaboration between industry and research and helping really also on all the research aspects that aren't yet fully developed to propel them faster into the market. I think that would be the last thing, so that we also see the contrail issues removed very, very quickly. These would be my, let's say, 3 key takeaways. And with that, I really want to thank you. I really look forward of the whole SAF market taking off very, very soon. I thank all of you for all your efforts and your ambitions and your hard work in this space. And wish you all the best of success in your endeavors. And well, thank you again for joining us on this fantastic panel.
Thank you so much, Tobias, for this, what I thought, brilliant moderation. And thank you for these very specific takeaways, as you've mentioned them, and your requests. We'll make them heard. Following this, I already mentioned in the beginning, grab your lunch outside. There's a very interesting panel here on long-duration energy storage starting in half an hour. Anouk and myself will have to head over to the City Hall, where there's also a panel on R&D priorities. So please continue to exchange contact details, opinions on these things, and thank you all for coming. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you.